The colony had many stories about her. Children were warned not to go near her cage, and guards walked with heavy weapons whenever they passed by. She was taller than most men, with skin marked by strange blue lines that glowed faintly in the dark. Her golden eyes never blinked when she stared at someone, and that stare alone was enough to make the bravest guard sweat. They called her the Untamable one, the wild alien woman who had broken every chain they tried to lock her with. No cell could hold her for long, and no punishment made her submit. She was the fiercest creature in the colony, and many believed she was cursed. One stormy evening, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain hammered against the colony walls. Guards argued about who would take the night watch. None of them wanted to go near her holding area when the storm howled like that. The storm gave her the chance she had been waiting for. A loud crack split the air as lightning struck near the power lines. The lights in half the colony went dark, and in that moment of chaos, she broke her chains again. A soldier shouted, but his voice was lost under the crash of thunder. By the time the lights flickered back, the cage was empty. The news spread fast. The Untamable one had escaped. People rushed into their houses, locking doors and windows. Mothers pulled their children close, whispering prayers that she would not come near. Merchants pulled down their shutters, and guards armed themselves with heavy rifles. No one wanted to face her in the storm. Some believed she would go on a killing spree, tearing apart anyone in her path. Others thought she would vanish into the forest outside the colony, never to be seen again. But while the colony drowned in fear, a man named Elias stood at the door of his small house. He was not a soldier, not a leader, just a human who had been living quietly on the edge of the colony. He had heard the same stories as everyone else. He knew how dangerous she was said to be. But when the knock came on his door, loud, heavy, and desperate, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He opened it. She stood there, her body drenched with rain, hair plastered against her sharp face. Her golden eyes burned like fire in the storm. Mud dripped from her arms, and her breathing was rough, as if she had run for miles. For a second, Elias froze. Every tale he had heard told him to slam the door shut, to run before she ripped him apart. But she didn't move. She only stood there, staring at him as water pooled at her feet. Behind her, the sound of soldiers shouting carried through the rain. They were searching for her already, their boots splashing in the mud. If he closed the door, they would catch her within minutes. If he let her in, he might not live to see the morning. His hand tightened on the wooden frame of the door, and for a long moment, man and alien only looked at each other. Then something strange happened. She lowered her head just slightly, like a predator choosing not to strike. The fire in her eyes didn't fade, but there was something else beneath it, something Elias couldn't name. It was not weakness, and it was not fear. It was closer to exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that no warrior could hide forever. The soldiers' voices came closer, and without thinking further, Elias stepped aside. "Come in," he said quietly. She walked past him, her steps slow but steady, her presence filling the small space of his home. When he shut the door, the storm outside seemed louder, pressing against the walls. Inside, the silence was heavy. She scanned the room like a wild animal, every muscle ready to fight if needed. Elias moved carefully, placing a towel and some dry clothes on the table. She didn't touch them. She only sat down in the corner, her back against the wall, eyes locked on him. The way she watched him made his skin prickle, as if she were waiting for him to make one wrong move. Hours passed like that, with the storm howling outside and the colony guards searching the streets. Elias didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his chair, pretending to read a book, though his eyes never left her. She didn't speak a word. She didn't need to. The tension in the air was enough to fill the silence. But as the night stretched on, something began to change. She stopped glaring at him with open threat. Her breathing slowed, and her shoulders dropped slightly. When he set a piece of bread and a cup of water near her, she didn't snarl or throw it back at him. She only looked at it, then at him, and after a long pause, she ate, not quickly, not hungrily, but carefully, as if testing whether it was safe. For Elias, it was a strange sight. The colony had painted her as a monster, an unstoppable beast. Yet here she was, quiet in the corner of his small home, eating bread like any tired traveler. The storm outside raged on, but inside, The danger felt different. It was no longer the fear that she would tear him apart. It was the mystery of who she really was and why she had come to his door instead of vanishing into the night. By dawn, the storm ended. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling light into the house. She was still there, watching him with unreadable eyes. Outside, the colony woke in panic. The Untamable One was free, and they were sure she would kill again. But Elias knew the truth was not that simple. He had seen something in her, something hidden beneath the rage. And though he didn't know what it was yet, one thing was clear. His life and hers had just changed forever. Inside the human's house, the storm still pounded against the walls, but the air inside was even heavier than the thunder outside. Elias sat at the small wooden table, pretending to keep himself busy, while the alien woman sat in the corner like a shadow, her golden eyes locked on him. She didn't blink much, and when she did, it was slow, almost deliberate, as if she wanted him to know she was watching his every move. She hadn't spoken a word since stepping into his home. Her wet hair clung to her face, dripping onto the floor, and her sharp features looked even harsher in the dim glow of the lantern. Elias thought about offering her more food, but something about her stillness told him that moving too quickly might provoke her. She was like a wild predator trapped in a room, silent but ready to strike if she felt threatened. When the wind howled and rattled the door, she finally stirred. Her hand moved to the small knife she had taken from one of the soldiers during her escape. Elias noticed the movement but said nothing. He didn't tell her to put it away. Instead, he slowly set his own knife from the table down, pushing it toward the center as if to show her he didn't intend to fight. Her golden eyes flicked to the knife, then back to him, sharp and suspicious. For a long while, she didn't move, and the only sound in the house was the steady drum of the rain. When dawn came, Elias lit the fire and boiled water for tea. He poured a cup, slid it across the table, and stepped back. She didn't touch it at first. She looked at it as though it were a trap, but finally, with movements slow and precise, she picked it up. She didn't drink like a human. Instead, she sniffed it, then tasted the smallest drop on her tongue. Elias couldn't help but notice that her hands, though strong and calloused, trembled slightly, as if her body was not as unbreakable as people thought. By midday, the storm had cleared, and shouts filled the streets outside. Soldiers were moving in groups, searching houses. Neighbors whispered behind closed shutters. Rumors spread like fire. The untamable alien woman had been seen near the outer ring. Some swore she had already killed again. Others said she had vanished into the forest. No one guessed she was sitting quietly in the home of a simple human man. The knock came at his door. Elias froze. He looked at her, and she was already standing, knife in hand, her body coiled like a spring. He raised a hand, silently begging her not to move. She stared at him, then at the door, and after a long, tense second, she lowered the blade, just slightly. Elias opened the door to see two guards. They questioned him harshly, their eyes searching the room behind him. "Did you see her?" they demanded. "She's dangerous. If she comes here, you'll be the first to die." Elias lied without blinking. He said he had been alone all night, storm-bound and half asleep. He even stepped aside to let them look, but the alien woman had already slipped into the shadows, blending so perfectly with the dim light that the soldiers didn't notice her. After a few more warnings, they left, stomping down the muddy path to the next house. Elias shut the door, bowed, his heart pounding, and when he turned, he found her eyes on him again. This time, they looked different. Suspicion was still there, but something else flickered beneath it, something like curiosity. The day passed slowly. She walked around the small house like a predator testing the edges of a cage. She touched things with sharp, questioning movements, lifting his tools, turning them over, studying them like artifacts from another world. When she came to a small framed photo of Elias's family, she froze. Her hand hovered above it, her eyes narrowing as if she was seeing something that stirred an old memory. Elias didn't speak. He let her look, and after a while, she set it back carefully, without the harshness she had shown toward everything else. When evening came, Elias cooked a simple meal. He placed half of it on a plate and left it across from him at the table. She didn't come right away, but eventually, she sat down. She ate in silence, every bite deliberate, and when she finished, she pushed the plate back as if acknowledging his offering. Elias felt the air between them shift slightly. She was still untamed, still dangerous, but she was no longer just a stranger in his home. Outside, the colony was boiling with anger. News reached Elias through whispers and passing voices. Leaders were furious that the human man had not yet joined the hunt. Some said he was a coward. Others suspected he was hiding something. Rumors grew sharper, and soon people began watching his house from a distance. Every time Elias stepped outside, he could feel their eyes on him, their suspicion thick as smoke. But inside, things were changing. That night, as he sat reading by the dim light, he noticed her watching him not with rage, but with something almost like thoughtfulness. Her sharp gaze softened, just for a second, before hardening again when she caught him looking. Still, that second told Elias more than words could. She wasn't just a beast. She wasn't just a captive who had broken free. There was a story behind her golden eyes, a reason she hadn't killed him the moment she stepped into his home. When the night deepened and silence returned, Elias finally whispered, almost to himself, "Why did you come here?" He hadn't expected an answer. He thought she would ignore him, like she had since the moment she entered. But then, for the first time, her lips moved. The voice was rough, low, like stone dragged across steel, but it was a voice. She said one word, just one, but it was enough to make Elias's heart race. He realized then that the untamable alien woman was not silent because she couldn't speak. She had been choosing not to. And now, for reasons he didn't yet understand, she had chosen him to hear her voice. The colony believed she was only a monster. Elias now knew she was something more, something the rest of them could never imagine. Morning light spread across the colony, but peace was nowhere to be found. The news of her escape had already shaken every house, and by the third day, whispers grew into angry voices. People gathered in the streets, demanding action. Fear made them restless, and restlessness made them cruel. They wanted her chained again, wanted her gone, wanted their lives free of the shadow of the untamable woman. But when they learned she had been seen near Elias's home, fear turned to rage. Elias heard the crowd before he saw them. Dozens of colonists stood outside his door, faces hard, voices sharp. They shouted his name, called him reckless, foolish, even traitor. "Hand her over," someone roared. "She's not safe for anyone." Mothers clutched their children close as if the very air around his home had become poisoned. Men pointed weapons, not at her. They couldn't see her inside, but at Elias. He was one of them, and yet he had chosen to protect what they believed was a monster. He opened the door, his face calm though his heart raced. "She's not what you think," he said firmly. But his words only drew more anger. They laughed bitterly, accusing him of being blind, of being under her spell. One man shouted that the alien had killed before and would kill again. Another woman screamed that Elias was risking all their lives by keeping her close. Every word was a knife, but Elias did not move aside. Inside, she listened. The alien woman stood near the window, hidden by the shadows, her golden eyes locked on the mob outside. Her chest rose and fell with quiet fury. She understood enough to know they were calling for her death, and her hand tightened on the knife she still carried. Elias noticed her stance and shook his head slightly, a silent plea not to go outside. She stared at him for a long second, and though her jaw clenched, she stayed. The colony leaders arrived soon after, flanked by armed guards. They were not ordinary men and women. They wore the dark uniforms of authority, their voices carrying weight that silenced even the angriest shouts. The commander stepped forward, glaring at Elias. "You will hand her over," he ordered. "She is dangerous, and you have no right to shelter her." His tone left no room for argument, but Elias stood taller. "She hasn't harmed me," he replied. "She deserves a chance to prove she's more than what you fear." The commander's eyes narrowed. "You're protecting her out of pity? Or madness? This creature has spilled blood before. She is a weapon that cannot be controlled. Do you want her to destroy us all?" Elias didn't flinch. He met the man's gaze and said quietly, maybe she wouldn't be untamable if anyone had treated her like more than a beast. Gasps filled the crowd. Some shouted for his arrest. Others whispered, uncertain now, wondering if there was truth in his words. The leaders, however, saw only defiance. "You are blinded by weakness," the commander spat, "and you endanger everyone." He gave an order, and the guards began to move forward. Inside, her breathing quickened. She pressed closer to the window, watching as armed men approached the door. The tension in her body was sharp, like a bowstring ready to snap. Elias turned his head slightly and saw her golden eyes burning with the urge to fight. He knew one wrong move would bring bloodshed, hers or theirs. The knock at the door was not gentle. A soldier banged hard, demanding entry. Elias placed himself in front of it, blocking the way. "If you take her, it won't end the fear," he warned. "You'll only create more." His words were ignored. The guard lifted his weapon, ready to strike him aside. At that moment, a sound slipped from behind Elias. It was soft, broken, but clear enough. The alien woman spoke a single word. It wasn't in human tongue, but its meaning was heavy. The crowd outside froze when they heard it. Even though they didn't understand the language, the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't the voice of a beast. It was the voice of someone pleading, someone who had carried more pain than they could imagine. Elias turned slightly, his eyes widening. She had spoken again, not to him alone this time, but to the world that hated her. The silence that followed was unbearable. The guards hesitated, confused by the sound of a creature they had sworn was mindless, savage, and beyond reason. But the leaders did not care. They barked fresh orders, louder, harsher. "Take her! Now!" The guards raised their weapons, moving faster this time. Elias had only seconds to decide. He could step aside and let them drag her away, saving himself from their anger, or he could stand firm. He stood firm. His hands gripped the doorframe as if he could hold back the entire colony. His voice was steady, though fear twisted in his stomach. "If you want her," he said, "you'll have to go through me." The guards stopped, uncertain. To strike him meant turning against one of their own. To hesitate meant defying orders. The commander's face darkened with fury, his eyes blazing. The crowd shifted, divided. Some shouted for Elias's punishment. Others whispered in confusion, their certainty cracking. The alien woman, still hidden, watched it all. For the first time in many years, she saw a human risking everything. Not for power, not for reward, but for her. Inside, something stirred in her chest, something she had long buried under layers of rage and scars. The human was not like the others. He saw her, not the cage, not the monster. And though she didn't yet understand why, she felt her grip on the knife loosen. The leaders pulled back that day, but not in defeat. Their eyes promised retribution, and the crowd left with fear and suspicion still burning in their hearts. Elias shut the door, his body trembling, sweat on his brow. He leaned against the wood, knowing the battle was far from over. When he turned, she was still staring at him, silent but different now. Her golden eyes held a strange weight, no longer only rage, but something Elias could almost recognize. Trust, fragile and uncertain. And though she said no more that night, her silence spoke louder than the storm outside. That night, the air inside the house was heavy. The shouts of the crowd had faded, but the memory of their anger stayed between them. Elias sat at the table, tired but awake, while she remained in the corner, her golden eyes unblinking in the dim light. He had defended her against his own people, and though he didn't regret it, the weight of that choice pressed on him. He wanted to understand why she mattered so much to him, why he felt she was more than the monster they believed her to be. At first, she was silent, the same silence that had defined her since the beginning. But slowly, with pauses and rough words, she began to speak. Her voice was low, strained, as if each word carried years of pain. Elias listened without interrupting. She told him about her past, not all at once, but piece by piece, broken fragments that painted a picture of betrayal. She had once been more than a prisoner, more than a feared beast. She had been a leader among her kind, strong and respected. She spoke of her people, of traditions Elias did not understand, but her tone was full of pride. That pride turned to bitterness when she explained how everything had been taken from her. Rivals had plotted against her, jealous of her power. One night, her own kin had turned on her, chaining her and handing her over to humans for safety, or perhaps to rid themselves of her forever. Elias studied her face as she spoke, watching the way her jaw tightened with every memory. Scars on her arms and back, which he had thought were from battles with guards, were older. They were wounds from whips and blades, punishments from those who had once called her sister. She had been betrayed not by enemies, but by her own blood. That was why she fought every chain. That was why no voice of authority could tame her. To her, every chain was another lie, another knife in the back. Her words were not smooth. She spoke in half sentences, her human tongue still rough. But Elias understood the heart of it. She had been broken, but not destroyed. Every time they locked her in, she remembered the night she had been abandoned. Every time they called her dangerous, she remembered the voices of her kin who had whispered lies about her. Her fierceness was not just wildness, it was survival. For a long while, Elias said nothing. He let the fire crackle and her story settle between them. Finally, he spoke softly. "You're not untamable, you're just unbroken." She tilted her head, not fully understanding his words, but she caught the tone. There was no fear in his voice, only respect. Something shifted in her gaze, the golden fire dimming to something more thoughtful. She fell silent again, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the wall she built to keep him away. It was heavy with things left unsaid, with pain too deep to speak in one night. Elias understood. He didn't push her to share more. Instead, he placed a blanket on the chair beside him, close enough for her to take if she wished, far enough not to intrude. She did not reach for it, but her eyes flicked to it, and for the first time, her stare softened. The next day, the colony continued its anger. The leaders spread warnings that Elias was protecting something dangerous, something that would turn on him soon. Neighbors passed his door quickly, avoiding his eyes. Children whispered cruel rhymes about the alien woman. Soldiers patrolled closer, their boots echoing against the stone streets. The whole colony felt like it was waiting for blood. But inside Elias's house, there was change. She began to move differently, less like a predator and more like a wounded warrior who was learning how to breathe again. She still watched him carefully, still guarded every gesture, but sometimes her eyes no longer held suspicion. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, they held exhaustion. Elias gave her space, but he also gave her trust. He left tools on the table, food on the counter, the door unbolted at night. Any moment, she could have left or turned against him, but she didn't. She stayed. That choice was louder than any words. One evening, as the sky turned red, she spoke again. Her voice was low, but steadier than before. She told him of a battle, one where she had led her warriors against raiders. She had fought until her blade broke, had stood while her soldiers fell. She had been victorious that day, but her victory had planted the seeds of betrayal. The others had feared her strength, feared her growing name. Elias listened, his chest tight with anger on her behalf. He wanted to say she deserved better, but he knew words would not heal scars so deep. She fell quiet once more, and Elias thought she was finished. But then she whispered a single sentence that made him still. "They called me a beast, before you." Her voice cracked slightly, and she looked away, as if ashamed of showing weakness. Elias didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, understanding more in her broken words than a full speech could explain. That night, when she lay on the floor near the fire, Elias looked at her differently. He no longer saw the untamable alien woman the colony feared. He saw someone betrayed, scarred, and forced into chains until she believed the lies about herself. And he knew that if the colony tried again to take her, they would not only be fighting her, they would be fighting him too. What neither of them realized was that their bond, fragile and new, was already being watched. Spies had seen the way she stayed in his home, the way Elias stood firm against the crowd. They carried word to the council, and the council, hungry to prove their power, began to plan. They would not let one human and one alien break their authority. They would not let a story of compassion spread through the colony. While the fire warmed them, and her golden eyes finally closed in the calmest sleep she had taken in years, shadows gathered outside. The danger was not over. It was only growing sharper, and the test of their fragile trust was yet to come. That night, the house was quiet, but outside the colony moved like a beast ready to strike. Soldiers gathered in secret, their boots silent on the wet ground, their weapons loaded. The council had decided. They would no longer wait for Elias to hand her over. They would take her by force. Rumors had already poisoned the people. They believed Elias had lost his mind, that he was protecting a creature who would kill them all. Fear had become anger, and anger had become permission for cruelty. Elias sensed something was wrong. The silence outside was too heavy. He sat near the fire, pretending to read, but his eyes kept flicking to the door. She was lying near the wall, her golden eyes half closed, but she was not asleep. Her body was tense, every muscle sharp as if she could hear the storm before it arrived. When the first boot struck the door, she was already standing. The wood shuddered under the blow. Soldiers shouted for Elias to open, their voices hard, demanding. He stood quickly, placing himself between the door and her. "Stay back," he whispered, though he knew she would never obey if danger came. She clutched her knife tighter, her breath slow and steady, like a predator waiting for the right moment. The door burst open. Armed men poured in, their eyes wild, their guns raised. They shouted orders, calling her a savage beast, yelling that she would not escape this time. One soldier lunged forward, aiming to grab her arm, but she moved faster than lightning. Her knife flashed, and the man stumbled back, his weapon clattering to the floor. The room exploded into chaos. Elias grabbed a wooden chair and slammed it against another soldier to keep him away from her. The impact sent the man sprawling, but two more pushed forward, swinging the butts of their rifles. She fought with raw power, knocking one man into the wall with a strike so strong the plaster cracked. Another tried to fire, but Elias grabbed his arm, forcing the barrel toward the ceiling. The shot rang out like thunder, shaking the small house. Outside, neighbors screamed, watching shadows of the battle through the flickering light. Some cheered for the soldiers, but others hesitated, fear twisting in their hearts as they saw the human fighting not against the alien, but beside her. Inside, the struggle grew fierce. The soldiers shouted curses, calling Elias a traitor. But he didn't stop. Every strike against him only fueled his determination. She fought not to escape, but to shield him, her body moving between Elias and the blades that swung for him. It was strange, almost unthinkable. The woman once called Untamable was now standing like a wall of fire in defense of a single human. One soldier raised his blade high, aiming for Elias's head. Before he could strike, she let out a roar that shook the walls. She slammed into him, sending both crashing into the table. The lantern fell and shattered, flames licking the wood. Smoke filled the air, and the soldiers hesitated. Firelight danced on her golden eyes, making her look like something far greater than the beast they had named her. Elias coughed in the smoke, pulling her up from the wreckage. "We have to go," he shouted, but she shook her head, fury burning in her gaze. She wanted to fight, to finish what they started. Elias grabbed her arm, not in command but in desperation. "If you stay, they'll kill you," he said, his voice breaking. For a second, she froze. She looked at him, truly looked, and something in his tone reached her. She gave a sharp nod. They pushed through the smoke, past the soldiers still reeling from the sudden fire. Outside, rain began to fall again, hissing as it struck the flames. The night was filled with screams, shouts, and chaos as the colony watched their so-called monster flee with the human. Some threw stones, others shouted warnings, but no one dared step in their path. Her presence was too fierce, too wild. Together, they broke through the circle of guards and vanished into the dark alleys of the colony. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the settlement, where the trees stood like black sentinels in the rain. There, under the cover of branches, they paused, their breaths ragged, their bodies bruised. Elias leaned against a tree, chest heaving. She stood a few steps away, her knife still clenched, her golden eyes scanning for threats. For the first time, Elias saw her hesitate. Not in battle, but in choice. She could run into the forest now, vanish forever, free at last. But she didn't. She turned back toward him, her face unreadable. Elias met her gaze, his voice hoarse. "You could have killed me that first night. You could have left me now. But you didn't. Why?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her blade. Slowly, carefully, she placed it in his hands. Her eyes locked on his, as if saying that her life, her fight, her choice was now tied to him. Elias stared at the weapon, then back at her. It was not surrender. It was trust, fragile and dangerous. She was no longer just the fiercest, untamable alien woman. She had chosen him, and that choice was more powerful than any chain or cage. Far behind them, the colony burned with anger. The council would not forgive. The soldiers would not forget. But in that rain-soaked moment at the forest's edge, Elias knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. The world had seen her stand not as a monster, but as a protector. And though danger waited in every shadow, one truth was clear. Together, they were stronger than anyone believed. The forest was dark, and the air was damp with rain. Branches creaked above them, and every sound seemed louder in the silence after their escape. Elias walked with heavy steps, his breath still uneven from the fight. She moved beside him, silent but sharp, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the night. Every few steps, she looked back, her ears alert, as if she expected soldiers to appear at any moment. They were not safe. Both of them knew it. By morning, they had reached a clearing deep inside the woods. Elias collapsed onto a fallen log, his body aching from bruises. She stood tall, not showing her pain, but he noticed the blood streaking down her arm, a deep cut from one of the soldier's blades. When he pointed to it, she brushed it off, as if wounds were nothing to her. But Elias couldn't ignore it. He tore a strip from his shirt and moved closer. She stiffened instantly, her body tense like a coiled spring, ready to strike. His hands froze midair. "I just want to help," he said softly. For a long moment, she stared at him, her golden eyes cold and untrusting. But then, slowly, she allowed him to wrap the cloth around her wound. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady, but her gaze never left his face. She was studying him, trying to understand why a human who should fear her was willing to bleed for her instead. Hours passed in silence. Elias built a small fire, roasting a bit of dried meat he had carried with him. He placed half near her. At first, she didn't move. Then, as the smell reached her, she picked it up and ate, slow and cautious, her eyes flicking back to him after every bite. Elias said nothing. He let her eat in peace, though inside he felt a strange mix of fear and awe. This was the same woman who had once been caged, who had torn through soldiers like a storm, now sitting across a fire from him as if she were only another traveler on a long road. But their peace did not last. By evening, the sound of boots echoed faintly in the distance. The soldiers had followed their trail. Elias's heart tightened, but before he could speak, she was already on her feet. Her hand gripped the knife, and her body shifted into the stance of a warrior. "We can't fight them all," Elias whispered. "If we do, we die." She gave him a sharp glance, as if to say she didn't care about dying. But something in his voice, steady and certain, held her back. When the soldiers appeared, firelight glinting off their rifles, Elias stepped forward. His body shook, but he raised his arms and shouted, "Stop! Leave her alone! She's not what you think!" His words only made them laugh. One sneered, "She's a beast, and you're her pet." Another lifted his weapon, aiming for her chest. Before the shot could fire, she moved. Her roar split the clearing, and she leapt into the soldiers like a wild storm. Blades flashed, rifles cracked, and the night lit up with sparks. Elias joined the fight, his fists striking, his body pushing against men twice his size. Together they fought, not as man and beast, but as two warriors standing back to back. She moved with deadly grace, each strike precise and full of fury. Elias fought with stubborn strength, refusing to let them take her. The battle raged. One soldier swung his blade toward Elias, but she caught it with her bare hand, blood running down her palm as she ripped it away. She spun and struck him down, her golden eyes blazing like fire. Another soldier tried to attack her from behind, but Elias shoved him aside, the two of them rolling in the dirt until she finished him with a swift strike. When the last soldier fell, silence swallowed the clearing. The fire crackled weakly, smoke curling into the night sky. Elias stood, his chest heaving, his body aching. She stood beside him, blood dripping from her arm, her face fierce but calm. Together, they had done the impossible. They had defeated a squad of armed men, side by side. Elias turned to her, his voice hoarse. "Why did you protect me?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his face. Then she touched his arm lightly, a gesture so small yet so powerful it made his heart tighten. It wasn't the touch of a beast. It wasn't the touch of an enemy. It was the touch of someone who had chosen to fight not for herself, but for him too. They stayed in the clearing until dawn, the fire long dead, the bodies of soldiers hidden by the shadows of the trees. Elias couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the way she had fought, the way she had shielded him without hesitation. She could have run. She could have left him to die. But she hadn't. She had stayed. When the first light broke through the leaves, Elias looked at her again. She was sitting on a rock, her knife resting across her knees, her golden eyes watching the horizon. For the first time, he saw not the untamable woman, not the feared alien the colony hated, but a warrior reborn, standing between the past that had broken her and the future that was still uncertain. She turned to him, and though she spoke no words, her gaze carried meaning. She was no longer alone. And though danger still hunted them, Elias understood a truth that made his chest burn with something fierce and unshakable. Together, they were stronger than any fear, stronger than any chain, stronger than the lies of the colony. The fiercest alien woman, once untamable, had chosen to fight not against him, but beside him. And in that choice, something greater had been born, a bond neither of them could deny, a bond that would change everything. When the sun rose higher above the trees, Elias and the alien woman stepped out of the forest together. The colony's walls stood far in the distance, tall and gray, but the sight no longer filled him with safety. Those walls were not protection anymore. They were chains waiting to close around them both. He knew the council would never forgive what had happened. They would not forget how she had fought their soldiers, how he had chosen her side. The path back was quiet. Birds sang in the branches, and the wind carried the smell of wet soil. But silence between Elias and her was louder than any song. She walked beside him with long strides, her golden eyes scanning every shadow. Elias glanced at her often, wondering what thoughts burned behind her fierce face. She had been untamable once, feared by everyone, but now she walked with him as if the ground itself belonged to them both. When they reached the edge of the colony, people came out of their homes. Whispers spread like fire, faces filled with shock, fear, and awe. Some pointed, others hid. Mothers pulled their children close, but no one dared step forward. Everyone expected her to roar, to strike, to remind them of the monster they believed she was. Instead, she stood still, her chin lifted, her golden eyes blazing not with rage but with strength. She looked less like a beast and more like a queen returning from war. The council arrived quickly, their guards surrounding the square. Their voices were harsh, commanding Elias to step away from her. They promised him safety if he abandoned her now. The commander raised his arm, ready to order her death. But Elias didn't move. He stood at her side, his voice clear and strong. She is not your prisoner. She is not your beast. She is more than you ever allowed her to be. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some sneered, but others looked uncertain. They had seen her fight, seen her shield Elias when she could have killed him. Doubt cracked their fear. The commander shouted that Elias had betrayed his own kind, but his words no longer carried the same weight. The people had seen something new, something the council could not control. One soldier stepped forward, his weapon raised. Before he could strike, she moved, not to attack, but to place herself in front of Elias. The crowd froze. The fiercest woman they had once caged was now protecting a human with her own body. It was a sight no one could deny. The whispers turned into murmurs of respect, fear melting into something different. The council tried to push harder, ordering the guards to take her down, but hesitation spread among the soldiers. They had fought her before, seen her strength, but now they also saw Elias standing beside her without fear. For the first time, doubt touched their loyalty. Some lowered their weapons. The commander's face twisted with rage, but even he could not force them forward. Elias stepped ahead, his voice rising. You call her untamable because you tried to break her. You call her dangerous because you never tried to understand her. But I saw the truth. She is not your enemy. She is more human than the cruelty you've shown. His words struck harder than any blade. The people looked at one another, uncertain, questioning what they had been told for so long. She stood silent beside him, but her silence was powerful. She didn't need to roar to be fierce anymore. Her presence alone was enough. When her eyes swept across the crowd, many lowered their heads, ashamed of their fear. For the first time, she was not a prisoner in their eyes. She was something greater, something they could not define, but could not ignore. The council realized they were losing control. Their threats grew louder, desperate, but the people no longer echoed them. The fire of anger had turned to sparks of doubt. The untamable woman had become a symbol, and Elias had become the voice that gave her meaning. Together, they had broken the image of the beast the council had built. Finally, the commander spat his last words. Then you both are outcasts. You will not find safety within these walls again. He turned and left, his guards following, though many did so with hesitation. The crowd slowly broke apart, some still afraid, others whispering with new respect. When it was over, Elias looked at her. She met his eyes, her face unreadable, but in the golden depths of her gaze there was something new. It was not rage, not suspicion. It was trust, fragile but real. She had chosen not to run, not to fight alone, but to stand with him in front of them all. They left the square together, the people parting to let them pass. The colony had not fully accepted her, but the seed of change had been planted. Whispers of fear would not vanish overnight, but whispers of respect had begun to grow. She was no longer just the fiercest woman in chains. She was free. That night, outside the walls, Elias and she built a fire beneath the stars. The flames flickered in her eyes as she sat across from him, her knife resting quietly at her side. For the first time, she looked at peace. Elias studied her, realizing how much had changed. He had taken in the fiercest, untamable alien woman, but she was not untamable anymore. She was something stronger, untamed in spirit, yet no longer alone. She glanced at him, and a faint, almost unnoticeable curve touched her lips. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was enough to make Elias's chest tighten. Without words, she had given him her answer. She had chosen him, not as her master, not as her captor, but as her equal. Together, under the endless night sky, they sat in silence, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something new. And though danger still lingered in the world beyond, Elias knew one truth would remain. He had done the impossible. He had taken in the fiercest woman of the colony, and she had let herself be tamed not by chains, but by trust. And now, side by side, they were ready to face whatever came next.